Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by someone wearing the exact same hat as me. I'm joined by Bryan Smith. How's it going, Bryan?
It's going good. I got your text this morning. I made sure to wear what you told me to wear, and I think we're looking good for the YouTubers out there.
I think so too. I'm excited to talk today because we got some deep dive action. I actually before we get into this, I was real quick story. So I was hopping on and I played some MLB The Show today, which
Nice.
I had some time to kill. My wife was at work a little bit late today, and I was just sitting around. So I was like, let me break out MLB The Show. And it was the first time I'd broken out the show. Like I have like a PlayStation 3. I don't have a PS5. I have a PlayStation 3. That's what I use. And so it's MLB The Show 16. I haven't played this game in years and years. And I break it out and I just hop into like my road to the show mode, and it was using rosters that were created back in like 16, 17, 18, something like that. And I'm playing the field and I'm on the Cubs, and pitcher Jake Stinnett
Nice.
delivers a pitch, and it's a ground ball to shortstop to Aramis Ottoman. And he
Yep.
picks up the ball and he throws it to first base, which this is a good one. Austin Upshaw is playing first base. So
Wow.
that's a bunch of names that I just experienced about an hour ago. So that's how my day's going. It was terrific.
You're literally the only person who you're like looking back nostalgically on a 2016 baseball game as a Cubs fan. And instead of bringing up, the Brendan Miller, Corey Friedman, like what happened in 2016, the Cubs win the World Series. Let's go down memory lane with with Jake Stinnett and Austin Upshaw. I love it.
Yeah, that's what we're here for. That's why we have a Cubs on Deck podcast dedicated to prospects. That's always a fun time. All right, man. Besides MLB The Show, let's actually get into the content of what we're talking about today. We got four main players that we're going to hit on today. Typically, we go into details about multiple players. You see during this intro, like typically there's 9+ players that we're talking about. Today we got the big four. We're talking about two guys returning from injury and two guys we're doing deep dives into that are the main two of the main prospects in the entire system. We'll get into Cade Horton and PCA at the end here. We'll make you guys stick around. We're going to lead off with Alexander Canario and Drew Gray. Two completely different stories. We've seen Drew Gray yet to make his first appearance in full season ball. Alexander Canario has made his way all the way up to AAA Iowa. Let's talk about Canario first. He's returning from injury where we saw him go down with an injury this past offseason. One for his ankle and one for his shoulder. It was the ankle, the leg. Yeah, the ankle and the leg, or ankle and the shoulder.
Yeah.
And we've seen
On the
pictures
same play.
on the same play. We've seen pictures from our guy Rich Biesterfeld down in Arizona of him running the bases, which is good to see. I don't know, man. I think that I want to kind of talk about where we envision Alexander Canario kind of going this season and what we're hopeful for, how we're kind of containing our optimism regarding Alexander Canario.
Yeah, I started hearing a couple weeks ago that Alexander was progressing really well and that they'd kind of moved up the timetable. I think August was sort of what they had in mind, and I think a couple weeks ago I heard that maybe July in some games, probably just in Arizona in the complex league at first, but that was a possibility. And I think maybe it was the Athletic that wrote up that as well, sort of that they had that sourcing as well, saying that. And yeah, I think that's right now the plan is spend the next month building back up, doing some stuff behind the scenes that we're not going to see much more than Rich's pictures. But then, probably a good 2 weeks in the Arizona Complex League. And then it'll be interesting, how they decide to assign him and move him as they go this year, and sort of, whether or not they just view this year as getting back on his feet, or if they're going to like try to push development at like an appropriate talent level.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've lumped Canario in with Ed Howard in a lot of ways, where
Yeah.
in terms of like prospect lists, I was higher on both of those guys at one point, but then the injuries kind of scared me off a little bit and knocked them down my prospect rankings. And then it's just a matter of like how do they return from injury, from some serious injuries, right? Right. This is not just like a normal twisted ankle, like these are a couple serious injuries from Canario. So it's a matter of like, is he coming back as explosive as he
Right.
was before? Because that's the big thing with Canario for me. I mean, there's injuries happen to a lot of players all the time, but for Canario, like the thing that makes, in my mind, the thing that makes him so good is that explosiveness. Whether
Yep.
it's at the plate and him just turning on pitches and hitting them 450 feet, or his outfield arm, or he was pretty good on the base paths as well. So there's a lot of um, they're different. This is not a one for one comparison, but like there's a lot of like Christopher Morel where like he does things that are just like hits the ball hard, throws the ball hard,
Yep.
runs fast. Like he just does all those explosive things. So like coming back from injury, can he get back to those levels once he fully returns?
Yeah, he was a red on the Statcast slider bubbles,
Yeah.
in a lot of categories before the injury, and it'll be interesting if he can match it the same way. I think what's also interesting to me is the breakout last summer really happened in July when I think he made a real uh, dedicated change to his plate approach. I think
Mhm.
started swinging at less pitches, started making a priority to get deeper into counts and to really wait for mistake pitches. It'll be interesting if, as he's fallen out of playing every day, is he able to find that again like right away? Is it something that comes back after a little while? Or was it just sort of a flash in the pan that's going to be hard to find again? Because that was what made him jump for me. The previous season was great. He showed a lot of power, but he was pretty crude in his plate approach. And I think he was going to run into some troubles. And he did a little bit at the beginning of the year in Double A, but he really adjusted fantastically in the summer. So whether those adjustments stuck or not is going to be, I think, the big question for me. That I don't even know that we're going to get answered this year. Probably more realistically, that we'll see the answers to that next season.
Yeah, I hope he's been tracking pitches like crazy down in Mesa. I'm sure he has, because that's something that he can do is sit in the
Right.
box and track pitches. But
Yep.
yeah, that's going to be huge because you're right. That's what made him really jump up lists. I mean, because I think that for me, he was clearly a top 10 guy going like at the end of last season before the injury happened. It's weird. It's also weird that it was an off-season injury. Like that doesn't happen very often. Like he was playing down in the winter league, and that doesn't happen very often either. So like at the end of last year, he was pretty clearly a top 10, like a top 10 guy in the system. I think that you had mentioned that he was like pushing top 5 for sure, right?
Yeah, I think he
On
was
yours.
going to be probably fourth.
Yeah. Yeah. So hopefully good things. I think that speculate a little bit. I would assume that he gets some sort of rehab type assignment to a lower level before making his way up to AAA Iowa. That's pretty common once you get guys in the upper levels, that they make some sort of rehab. A lot of times you'll see it in South Bend. I don't know why it's always South Bend, but it seems like it's always always in South Bend for rehab for some of those guys. So
The
uh,
other, by the way, just to jump in, one more interesting decision I think they're going to have is, I think they're going to have him play winter ball again to make up those at bats. And so they're going to have to decide, is the Arizona Fall League the better fit, or does he go back and return to the team he started playing for last year in the Dominican Winter League? But there's going to be a little scar tissue there, probably both just in Alexander's mind and with the Cubs, just like he's sort of away from us, like we're not controlling his movements on a day-to-day basis. So you know that level of like control that the Cubs opt to take or not take is something I'm going to watch closely, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, that is super interesting. That's a weird concept, right? But that's interesting. All right, let's go to another guy from Canario who's in AAA to Drew Gray, who just made his first appearance in the Arizona Complex League this past week, which is really fun to see because he's coming back from Tommy John surgery. That was his return. He defeated Tommy John surgery by pitching in that game.
Yep.
Um, Really good to see Drew Gray throwing. I know that after he was drafted out of IMG Academy a couple of years ago. It's weird to see Jackson Ferris, who was also drafted out of IMG Academy a year later, already making his debut in full season ball, already a few starts under his belt there in Myrtle Beach, and Drew Gray still working his way back. That's what happens when you go down with Tommy John. But man, I'm excited to see Drew Gray. I'm excited to see him on TV, on MILB TV, once he gets called up to Myrtle Beach. I'm sure that'll happen at some point this summer, definitely by the end of the year. But like Drew Gray's a guy known, I think known predominantly because he's a data guy, right? Like he puts up really good. I don't know in terms of how he likes to track the data. I mean in terms of his pitches,
Yeah.
the fastball spin rates, the curveball spin rates, the slider, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think we've heard a little bit that the velocity might be at an all-time high now, coming off Tommy John, probably getting a little stronger in the arm than he was before. And the results in his first start in the complex league were really good. I mean, he struck out 7 guys in just 2 2/3 innings. So, a guy that is already showing us that he's taken a jump a little bit, but it's going to be really good when we can see it on film and really break down sort of the reasoning behind the success he's having. I can't wait for him to get to Myrtle Beach. I saw when I was in spring training this March, I saw him and Jackson Ferris just like joined at the hip, doing everything together in spring training. And so I know those guys are probably dying to get together on the Myrtle Beach roster and hang out for the summer. So hopefully that happens sooner rather than later.
He's in referencing where he kind of falls on prospect rankings a lot of times, like what we were talking about with Alexander Canario. Like he's been the status of him on prospect lists has been like very much like in flux, right? It's we
Yeah.
hear a fun thing about like, he gets drafted and we're like unsure about him, so he's like down on lists. Then we hear some fun things about his the metrics on his pitches. He rises up lists. He goes down with Tommy John. He falls down lists. We're optimistic about him coming into this year. He might rise up lists. And then
Yeah.
he got off to a slower start in terms of the rehab process, and so he drops down. I don't know. It's just he's been up and down, up and down. I'm excited to see him like actually playing full season ball. That's when we can like really get a better idea of like how does he compare to some of these other guys that we're watching on TV on a daily basis.
Yeah, my thought is give him maybe 3 more appearances in the complex league and then give him the bump up for the rest of the year. And, this Myrtle Beach team is good enough to probably get to the playoffs. So he'll also have that to pitch in September, which will be really useful for him as well. So I think there's a ton more to gain from 2023 for Drew Gray. And, really no reason he can't be a top 15 prospect at the end of the season if things go really well. So, certainly an important name in the system for the Cubs.
Yeah, there's a loaded rotation in Myrtle Beach right now that as soon as it is time for him to go up there, there's going to be a slot because someone like Brody McCullough or Nick Hull can get promoted up to South Bend. We might talk about some of that at the end of this episode, depending on time. But there's plenty of guys in Myrtle Beach rotation now that can be up in South Bend, making some room for a guy like Drew Gray.
Yep.
All right, man. Let's get into the meat of this episode right away. There are 2 guys I mentioned, Cade Horton and PCA, arguably the top hitting prospect and the top pitching prospect in the system. You guys know I go back and forth on who the top pitching prospect is in the system every single day, and I think that when I drop my new list over at Northside Bound in a couple weeks, who's to say who my top ranked pitcher will be? Who was you just came out with your new updated list over at Bleacher Nation? Who was your top arm?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm going to use this as a jumping off point to start talking about Cade because I ended up having Ben Brown 4th in the system and Cade Horton 5th in the system. So, Ben is the number 1 pitching prospect, Cade is number 2. And one of the reasons I wanted to have a conversation about Cade today and, to talk about his prospect status a little more is because, I watched that last start in South Bend, definitely his best pro outing. And, it kind of I think we saw some new things from him. We've seen some new things the last couple weeks. And I think it illuminated for me that I've been grading him probably on a little bit of a curve and, grading him a little harshly, like holding him to a standard that might have been somewhat unfair. And I think like that was one of those outings where it was like, Bryan, get over yourself. Like, stop trying to like ask him to be, something more than you're asking the other prospects to be. And if you're just evaluating like what you're seeing on the film, I think, he is the Cubs top pitching prospect. I think I see that now.
I mean, like the numbers are very clearly there.
Yeah.
I'll rattle off some of those here shortly. But I think the eye test is there. I was with you there 100% in terms of like critiquing him. I think it's kind of interesting that we're talking about PCA and Cade Horton, both these guys. I think that we're looking at both of these guys and like nitpicking, and it's
Yep.
weird. I don't know why do you think it's just because they are the top dogs in the system to a certain degree that we're just nitpicking it? I think part of it is like we're protecting ourselves because we're
Right.
watching the major league team, right? We're watching this major league team and we're watching a lot of guys that granted they were never as highly ranked as PCA and Cade Horton, but guys that are making their debuts or extended periods of time up at the major league level and like struggling. And it's like I don't want to get hurt. As Cody Del Mundo says, I'm ready to get hurt again, right? Like I don't want that to happen. So I think I think we're protecting ourselves to a certain degree, and that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, I think a lot when we talk about prospects, we're, hoping for them to become major leaguers. And it's really exciting when a guy who's, right on that fringe of minors and majors, like takes the jump necessary to get to the major leagues. I think that's one thing that like excites you and me a ton about, guys 10 through 50 in the system, for instance. But when you're talking about people as talented as Pete and Cade, you're talking about people that really make an impact on the 2025 to 2030 Cubs, which is like, a big part of the happiness that we get from watching baseball every day. So, the difference between Cade and Pete being like slightly below average major leaguers and being stars is really meaningful, not just to like, obviously their careers and their earnings and everything, but it's like the entire fan base's happiness to a certain extent. Like they wear that as the prospects of the caliber they are. And I think what comes with that is you get graded, really harshly, and you get held to standards that sometimes aren't fair.
I'm really glad you brought up that like 10 to 50 or 15 to 50 range of prospects. Because I know that people like tweeting at me and commenting and stuff about how I really love certain prospects and they'll call out certain players, but guys that I have ranked in that 15 to 50 range, not the top 10 guys. Like, oh, you really like these dudes.
Yeah.
It's the BJ Murrays and the Kevin Mates and like those guys of the world. And part of that is because it feels more like I can dream on those guys. Like I'm really hoping that that they can carve out some sort of major league career. And it's easier to just root for them
Yep.
to succeed in some way versus PCA and Cade Horton and Ben Brown and Jordan Wicks and Owen Casey and all these guys. Like there's that expectation that they
Yes.
carve out a
Good
role
word. Yeah.
as opposed to a hope that they carve out a role. And so like you're just constantly nervous about it. And I'm nervous for these guys. And I'm nervous for these guys. And it's like I'm willing to bet that PCA he doesn't have a nerve, like he's not nervous at all. He's never been nervous about anything. Like watch him play. Pete's
Right.
never nervous. But like I'm nervous for him. All right, let's get back on track to Cade Horton. I did want to throw
Sure.
out some of these numbers because really it's the last few starts that have forced us to talk about him in depth in this episode. I'll talk about this last start of his though. He threw on June 7th, so that was on Wednesday of last week, and he threw 5 innings, gave up 2 hits, 10 strikeouts, 0 walks.
Yeah.
And it's just like, man, it is crazy what he's doing. If you remove just the one start, like when he got called up to South Bend, he had a clunker in his high A debut. If you remove that one start, which I know you can't just like remove starts, but if you do, he has a 1.78 ERA this year, 0.86 WHIP. Opponents are slashing 180 with a 222 on base and a 243 slug. He's got a strikeout rate almost 45%. He's got a walk rate right about 5%. And to me, the thing that has really set him apart this year are the swings and misses that he's getting. The swing strike
Crazy.
rate is 22%, which is like unheard of, like literally unheard of. And the CSW percent, which is just shy of 40%. Again, if you're removing that one start. So I don't know, man. You want to talk a little bit about the swing and strikes because that's what's crazy to me with him is what we're seeing with those whiffs.
Yeah, I wrote a piece on Cade last week after his really good start at Bleacher Nation, and at the time I did a query in the Fangraphs numbers, and at that time, and I haven't updated it, he was the top starting pitcher in the minor leagues at swinging strike rate. I think I'd looked a couple days before that start, and he was like in the 4 through 6 range, and just I mean, what did he have? He had 20 swings and misses, I think, in his
Yeah,
last start.
he faced 17 batters, had 20 swings and misses.
Yeah, so just absurd stuff that moved the numbers up even more and got him past the guys that had been in front of him. I think, one thing that I'm seeing in South Bend a little differently, and this is why it's actually really useful to move players up when, into the system, is sometimes they go to a new place and they hang out with new coaches, and the coaches see things that the other coaches either maybe didn't see or just didn't prioritize because there were other parts of their development they were focusing on. So I think Cade got to South Bend and threw, some bullpens for Clay Mortensen. And I think Clayton was like, that curveball is ridiculous. Why aren't we using that curveball? Because in Myrtle Beach, it was pretty much fastball, slider, and they were working on that changeup. That's been a priority this year. I think he's been throwing that curveball a lot the last month. And just in this last outing, you really started to see a take separation from the slider in a much bigger way. It was much more sort of north-south, 12-6, and the slider, curves and is probably, I don't know, 7:30 on a clock. And so you get that difference, and that makes him even nastier because now, a hitter can still read breaking ball out of his hand and, still not be able to do anything with it because he doesn't know where it's going. So the curveball, I think, has been the real story in South Bend so far. And I think that's a big reason why he looks, even better, why he's getting even more swinging strikes in South Bend than he did in Myrtle Beach.
Yeah, we wanted to talk a little bit about like his next steps in terms of his development. Like what does he need to continue to check off of the list?
Yeah.
And that's exactly where I wanted to go, was that curveball and slider and the separation between those two pitches. Because I think it was 3 starts ago when we released, it was either 3 or 4 starts ago that he really started to use the curveball more.
Yeah.
That would have been his second or third start in South Bend. And the first game he kind of really started to use it, there wasn't a whole lot of separation between the two pitches. They were fading together quite a bit.
Yep.
And it's like, all right, we got to see. I mean, like it's nice that he's breaking out this curveball, but let's see 2 different pitches between the curveball and slider. And this last start, like they were pretty distinct. Like they were 2 pretty distinct pitches. They can continue to be even more distinct, but like the difference that he's made in a few starts with those 2 pitches is kind of insane, dude. Like it's kind of crazy that he's done that quickly. But that is like number one on there's two major things I have in his development. One is that separation between those 2 pitches, and then the changeup that you mentioned too. Continuing to develop that changeup. I think that if he can have those 4 pitches, that's like a start. We thought he could be a starting pitcher with the slider and fastball. If he can have 3 really good pitches and a 4th also there, I think that's definitely a starting pitcher.
Yeah, and one thing I didn't write about in my piece last week, but because I wasn't sure enough about it, but I think worth talking about here, is I think what I saw on video as well was a few 2-seam fastballs, because I saw some pitches with some real arm side run, and Cade, generally speaking, throws a 4-seamer that almost looks like a cutter sometimes. So if you see a pitch from Cade with arm side run, that's not a usual thing for him, and so that's another pitch that I think the Cubs are going to work on with him for sure. The Cubs really like pitchers to have both a sinker 2-seamer as well as a 4-seamer, especially the guys that can cut their 4-seamers a little bit. So, I think in time, probably by the end of this season, Cade's going to have 5 pitches, and that's a really, really nice jump for a guy that got to the NCAA tournament last year with like 1.5.
Yeah. Joke's on you. You just put that out to way more people on this podcast than you ever would writing at some website called Bleacher Nation. So I think that another thing I want to talk about in terms of his development is that last year he was in college. He was throwing at Oklahoma. He was coming off Tommy John surgery. And when he was at Oklahoma a year ago, he only threw 53 2/3 innings on the mound, right? This year, he's already at 34 innings total over the course of the year. That doesn't seem like a whole lot, but when you're comparing it to 53 total from last year, you're careful about how you want to utilize him and how often you want to utilize him and how deep in starts you want to have him go. Because I think that like if you want to continue to develop him as a starting pitcher, you want him to kind of eat innings, you want him to throw 5, 6 innings, but you can't have him do that throughout the entire season. It's like I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if you have any thoughts in terms of like how they limit those innings this year.
No, it's really tricky because I mean, go back a year ago and he starts pitching in the NCAA tournament and then in the College World Series, and he's being asked to throw 110 pitches in those games, and like Cade is athletic and he's strong and he's like capable, like he can do that. I'm very confident that when the Cubs like take the reins off and say like you can throw 100 pitches now, like he will be ready to do it. And it's one of those things that's really tricky because part of you wants to say like build him up, like let him get to that 80-90 range because he is capable of doing it, and because you want him to have that muscle memory of like, okay, what do I do when I start to feel myself tiring? Like, what are the things I can lean back on? That's something the Cubs like don't really ask from their pitching prospects. I mean, look at Ben Brown, the number of pitches the Phillies were having him throw,
Yeah.
and then he comes right over the Cubs system and the Cubs basically chop off 20%. The Cubs are very conservative when it comes to that stuff. So I expect the Cade will probably be topped out at something like 85, 90 innings. And I bet that he won't have a start this year where he throws more than maybe 80 to 85 pitches. And, I'm not criticizing it, but I do wonder if sometimes they're not properly weighing like what he's going to be asked to do in the future, even in 2024. Like, where we're at right now, Cade Horton could pitch in the major leagues in 2024. That is now very much on the table in my mind. And so I think you have to start developing him with that in mind. And I wonder if they should maybe be a little less conservative and maybe ask a little more of him.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to point that out. You mentioned the Ben Brown thing and how they had him throw far less pitches than what he did when he was with the Phillies. So I looked it up here. Ben Brown, his last start in the Phillies organization was an outing where he threw only 52 pitches. I don't know what was up with that. I don't know. Maybe that was right
Trade
around
talk,
was
trade
it the
talks, I
trade?
think. Yeah.
Yeah. So before that, though, he threw 91 pitches, 88 pitches, 91, 90, 80, 85. And then as soon as he was acquired by the Cubs and put in our organization, he threw 75, 77, 78, 73, 70, 74, and 75. So he didn't touch 80 as soon as he came over to the Cubs.
I mean, do
After
you think a single Cubs pitching prospect threw 90 pitches in an outing last year? I wonder.
um no.
I bet it didn't happen.
I bet Tyler Santana did.
Okay. And I'll go, if one did, I'll go with Javier Assad. But
Okay. Yeah, well, yeah, but that's cheating a little bit, right? Like he made it up to the bigs.
right. Yeah, no, I mean even before, but yeah,
Okay,
maybe he might have gotten called up too early for that to have been expanded there.
yeah. Yeah, but that to your point, like I don't, it's just not something they do. So
Yeah.
that becomes really interesting with Cade. I guess to wrap up our Cade talk here, we want to talk a little bit about like a revised update of kind of what we see from him in terms of different MLB outcomes, how we view him as a prospect. Um, how significantly has that changed over the last 4 starts from Cade Horton for you?
I think that I had in my mind a lot more reliever risk for him a couple starts ago than I not a couple starts ago, like his first few outings of the year than I do now. I think I think he's checking a lot of the boxes, and I think just like Brett Taylor at Bleacher Nation has told me before, like sometimes you got to just read the hitter's swings and let that tell the story, and because like sometimes the hitters just tell you what you need to know, and if hitters are whiffing on 20% of their swings, that tells you a lot, and that tells you that he's a real problem. And so, yeah, I think he has gone to a different tier for me, and I think he is like deserving of top 100 status. I think he's a guy that the Cubs should be thinking about, second half of 2024 in their rotation and like a stalwart after that. opening day 2025, like as one of the 5 arms in that rotation. And yeah, I'm allowing myself to get excited about him, which is pretty fun.
I know that's where I'm at too. That's where I'm at too. I've been hesitant, but I've seen I've seen a lot of people very, very excited for Cade Horton and people that don't even follow prospects all that closely. And when that starts happening, right, when people start legitimately getting excited for prospects like Cade, not even like the Matt Mervis excitement, like the actual like this is a potential like superstar, then I can start to hop on board a little bit too, you know, because I'm always cautious about these type of things. Yeah, man, I think that like the incorporation of these of 2 or 3 pitches in addition to the fastball slider is what has really like gotten me excited. It's a swing and miss that's got me really excited. I mean, I think that before I was like, all right, like maybe he can be like a 2, but like with a downside of like going to the bullpen, right? Now I'm thinking like maybe there's a number 1 in him with Cade Horton, you know,
Sure.
and that's not where I was to begin this year. I was absolutely not where I was to begin the year, and I just want to point out once again that like how disappointed people were when the Cubs drafted Cade Horton. You
Yeah.
know, how not only disappointed, but like I think people were disappointed when the Cubs drafted Jordan Wicks. I think people were pissed when the Cubs drafted Cade Horton. I think there
Yeah.
was a different vibe, you know. Um, I think when he was drafted and everyone pointed to his ERA and everyone pointed to all these different things that like really didn't describe who he was as a pitcher now or in the future, it was I was confused. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little confused, having not followed the path of Cade Horton when it first happened. But I wasn't pissed, but people were pissed, and so I'm glad to see him shoving because it very easily could have gone the other way, where he got out the gate slow. He had a
Yeah.
rough first year, and everyone was pointing and saying, "Look, they screwed up again." And we all know the front
Losers.
office,
Yeah.
yeah, the front office just needs more reason for fans to be pissed at them, you know.
Right.
So it's exciting. It's just that is one of the more exciting storylines of the entire system this year, in my opinion.
I will say this. In my assessment, I'm still probably a half grade lower on the fastball than pretty much like everyone that seems to write a scouting report on him. I'm not 100% convinced yet that it's like the dominant offering that sort of like just the velocity suggests that it is. So that is something like if there's one more sort of box in my mind that he has to check before like, you know, full excitement comes from me, like before the hype train reaches like level 10, I just need a little more convincing on the fastball. I don't know. There's something about it that just maybe it's because he hasn't had great command and great feel this year outside of the last 2 starts, but I need a little more to be convinced that it's going to play in the majors.
You need a little more movement, a little more velo, or a little more of both.
It might be life, I think, like the
Okay.
life, the sort of late ride on the pitch, like a
Yeah.
cut. I'm going to get into zoom match territory real quick here. I'm not going to go too far into it, but a cut carry fastball means that like it doesn't run as much as a normal pitch. It actually like almost looks to a hitter like it cuts, even though it technically doesn't, and that it also has above average ride. But that can be a real big range, and sometimes it can be a pitch that cuts more. Sometimes it can be a pitch that rides more. I kind of feel like Cade's like I don't always see the ride on that pitch unless he locates it sort of perfectly in the top third of the zone. So, Justin Steele, for example, is a guy where like Justin doesn't necessarily have to locate perfectly and hitters still don't barrel it. Like they do not see the ball well the entire time. And when they swing the pitch, like they think they hit it on the barrel and they miss by 2 inches and it doesn't go as far as they think. Cade, I don't see it the same way. Like I do think hitters can find the barrel to the ball a little easier than a guy like Justin. So it's just something I'm going to watch for.
Real quick sidetrack on the cut ride thing. I know we don't want to get into it too much, but I think that that's such an interesting concept because, and I'm kind of talking this out as I'm thinking about it for the first time.
Yeah.
Um, all other movements of pitches in Major League Baseball, I think that like you and I can relate to like normal like people
Yeah.
that don't play Major League Baseball can relate to it, right? We've no matter what level of baseball, I mean not no matter what level, but basically whatever level of baseball you've played at, you've seen a curveball like go down and away from you. You've seen a slider go like you've seen a two seamer sinker, like you know how the baseball can can tail on you. You know,
Yeah.
you know that action. The cut ride only happens at like the highest level of talent, right? There's no cut ride in like low level college ball or like high school baseball. You know, that I mean, like normal high school baseball, not like freaks that are at IMG Academy like Drew Gray and Jackson Ferris, you know. So like it's such a hard thing to like put into context and conceptualize like what is happening to the baseball when we talk cut ride. But I just always go back to Justin Steele and use that as
Yeah.
the exact definition of what cut ride fastballs are and why he generates so little hard contact. You know what I mean? You just got to point to pitchers that do it as opposed to like trying to explain the exact logistics behind it. You know what I mean?
Yep. And there's a real thin line there between like a cut ride fastball that like, it's going to almost have like a diagonal movement on a hitter, and that fastball straightening out. Um I think it's like a thinner line than it is with other fastball types, and that's just something those guys like they have to execute, because their misses on those fastballs, I think, face harsher consequences than other kinds of fastballs. So it's just like, you got to be right. You got to make every pitch. And that is a nice thing about someone as athletic as Cade Horton, that I think like he's going to be able to sort of feel his way on a mound and like feel his arm action, like correct mistakes a lot faster than other players. And so I think there is a reason to think that he'll be totally fine. It's just like the one sort of red flag in my mind.
Last thing on this, and to your point about the fastball, you have to have a good fastball to succeed in the major leagues. We're
Yeah.
seeing that with Hayden Wesneski, right? We're like we know how good Hayden Wesneski's slider is. We know that when he's at his best, he can locate the pitches where he wants to locate them. But you have to have a good fastball. You
You
have to have a
don't,
good
and you don't have to throw it 60% of the
no,
time like they
yeah,
used to in the 90s. Like, I mean, that's not what we're saying. Like, it has to be so good that it can be thrown 70 times a game. It's like you can throw it 35% of the time, but that 35% of the time, it's got to be pretty good. Otherwise, you get beat. Like,
yeah,
these guys are amazing, incredible players. And like, you throw a flat fastball in the major leagues and, you get punished.
yeah, yep. All right, man. Let's talk about PCA, who is punishing baseballs right now. He has looked very good the past several weeks. Over the past, I have some numbers pulled up here. Hold on. Since May 12th, so we're actually recording this episode on June 12th. So over the last month, PCA has a batting average of 294. He's got an on base percentage of 394 and a slugging of 566. Sorry, 565. Sorry, that was a big mistake there. He's hit 5 home runs in the past month, 2 triples, 4 doubles. He's striking at a 26% clip and walking at an 11% clip. And I pulled those numbers because while it showcases how hot he's been, um, it also has a strikeout rate of 26 and a
Mhm.
walk of 11, right? And I think that those two numbers are super interesting to me as he continues to climb the ladder, because we know that he is not going there. There is no way on earth that he continues to slug this way once he reaches the majors. If he does, he is an MVP caliber type player, right? Like that's not going to happen, right? So we can't continue to expect him to have 4 triples or whatever, 2 triples and 5 home runs over the course of a month every month. So I don't know, man. The strikeout rate and the walk rate are super, super important for me in watching PCA go to work. But he's looked damn good over the past season, but month
Yeah.
especially.
Yeah, I mean, he went on the injured list, or maybe he didn't go on the injured list. He just missed about a week of action. I can't remember, but since then, I mean, he's really looked like himself again. I mean, and even better than himself. You pulled it from May 12th. If you pull it from May 28th, I mean, he's hitting 359 with a slugging percentage in the 700. So it's been really, really ridiculous the last two series against a pretty good Chattanooga team and then a Rocket City team that's sort of okay. But yeah, I mean, I think the exciting thing is that, I think he learned some things during some struggles towards the end of April, the beginning of May. I think that baseball is real ridiculous. And, he's a guy with a golf club swing, like, uppercut all the way. And so he's in a league where pitches are riding like he's never seen pitches before, like a 90-mile-per-hour fastball that feels like a 95-mile-per-hour fastball, and the 95s feel like 99s. And guys are using that baseball to pitch at the top of the zone, which is like sort of naturally not a great fit for his swing. And to see him like adjust this quickly and succeed by June, and I mean, past Owen Casey and OPS, like, just like pushing forward to take the team lead in that stat, which I just can't believe given where we were a month ago. Like, doubt this guy for a second. Like, are you really going to change his grade because he struggles for 3 weeks? Like, you're showing on yourself there. And like, either you're telling that like your evaluation on him last year was bad, or you're just somebody that overreacts to really short samples. Like, Pete Crow-Armstrong is not any worse of a projection this year than he was last year. If anything, like, the fact that he's succeeding right now tells us that he's going to be a damn good major league player.
I go back to what RM Layton said when he came on this show a couple months ago about PCA, when before PCA was drawing any kind of walks, right? Early
Yeah.
on in the season, he was walking at like, I think, a sub 3% walk rate.
Right.
And RM came on and he said, can you really expect a guy who we know can hit the crap out of the ball to be patient and take his walks? I'm paraphrasing, right? But like, if you know you can hit at that level, if you know you can hit above 300, why on earth would you keep drawing walks, right?
Right.
Like, why would you do that? Now we're seeing him draw walks and showcase power. It's a different player than it's a completely different player than what I expected when we got him in the trade, right? Where it was like, oh, can he develop that pop? Can he? Well, he is showcasing the pop on multiple different fronts, right? Over the fence power, extra base power, the exit velo numbers are terrific. He's kind of doing it all, man, and I'm loving every second, and it's exciting as hell. Like, he is so much fun to watch play baseball.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And, I think the thing that's been really interesting this year, you have it in our notes and I'd highlighted it myself, is, the fact that he has got a ground ball rate under 25% is just like, it's some of the most absurd. I was just starting to pull up, like, is it maybe one of the lowest ground ball rates in the entire minors? Like, I think the Cubs challenged him a little bit and said, we want to see how far this power can go. And, we want to let that swing, which, like I said, is like uppercut, sort of designed to hit fly balls. Like, we want to let you do that. And like, he's taking it to the extreme, almost to the point where I bet like the Cubs are like, all right, like,
Easy.
you're good, like, slash still, like, you're so fast, like, we still want ground balls between, shortstop and third base. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch, is like how the Cubs deal with that. But I think what it tells us is like, he takes to coaching really well. He is, he's somebody that can succeed in this power way, even in the major leagues, when like he's not a body type that you would ever think would be somebody that's above average power. But I think he's gonna like sort of find his way there.
I think he's just super stubborn, man. Like, he's
Yeah.
like, all right, like, I need to walk more. Okay, let me like raise this puppy up to like 11%. He's like,
Yeah.
all right, I need to hit the ball in the air more. Let me do it at 60% fly ball rate. Like, it's
Yeah.
just it's crazy how he just kind of on a dime switch it. And that goes to show like how good he is, that he can just say, all right, now I'm working on this part of my game. I'm gonna excel at it, master that, and then move on to the next thing to make my game go to the next level. I don't have
My favorite thing about Pete, by the way, is like, you watch him and the excitement level that he gets to like 4 times a game with like both his successes and his teammates. And like the best, what you should watch for when you watch Tennessee games is like when he's doing that stuff, watch his teammate behind him, because they are usually just like cracking up at how intense he is. And I think his teammates, like I've talked to guys about him, like guys love his intensity. Guys like want to run through brick walls for him. And, you know, I can't wait to see him in Chicago with like Dansby and Nico, who are so like steady and just like, you know, professional and adult in every way. And like Pete's going to come in there and he's going to be like his form of awesome. And you know what? Like they're going to love him.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to bring out like a form of Nico and Dansby that like we don't see yet. And so I just can't wait for that to happen.
I'm picturing, you know, Dansby always like stands at the top of the steps when a guy hits a home run, and he's like, like giving him a high five when he comes back. I'm picturing Dansby like being there for the high five for PCA's home run, and PCA just like tackling him, like running through him, like, you know, like I love it. I'm really excited for that, and so PCA is very fiery, right? Like he's been thrown out of a few games this year. I've seen him be thrown out of 2 games for sticking up for his teammate, right? Like there was the one game he got thrown out from the on deck circle when Zach Davis or somebody got run up on strikes. And I've seen people like, oh, like he needs to keep that in check. He needs to calm down. Like, no, like, you know, when we talked years ago when it was Javi Baez, and Joe Madden was very careful to not limit Javi Baez as to like who he is as a baseball player. Same thing with Pete, man. Like you let, like, he plays with his hair on fire. You got to continue to, like, and he does the same thing whether he's in the dugout or running from home to third on a triple. Like, you let him be that Hollywood Pete. Like, he has to be Hollywood Pete or he's not him, you know. Just let it ride. And I love it. I love every second of watching him play. I wanted to point out back to the fly ball rate, ground ball rate. I don't have these numbers to back it up because I don't have his pull rate versus opposite field rate for fly balls versus ground balls, but it feels like a lot of the ground balls he hits are to the right side of the first baseman to the second baseman, versus he's very, very good at using the whole field when he's hitting the ball in the air or on a line. That's not necessarily something that I see as a real concern. It's just something I'm like keeping in the back of my mind as of right now. And because he's I don't know, it's something, if you're rolling over on the ball, like weak over to first base and second base, then that's a problem. But I'm not seeing that. Like he's ripping the ball to first base, but he's also only hitting the ball on the ground 20% of the time. So like, I don't know. It's just something to keep in the back of our minds as he continues to climb the ladder in Iowa in the major leagues. I'd love to see a spray chart for him for that level, but we'll wait until he gets up to Iowa for that.
The thing that I have my eyes on, I've talked to a couple Tennessee pitchers in the last month, you know, specifically about the baseball, and what I've heard consistently, and I think makes intuitive sense with this different baseball in AA that's pre-tacked, is that it is great for breaking balls. It's great for, you know, things with spin. It makes fastballs like have a little more spin, a little play up. The pitch that it does not help are changeups. I've heard that changeups are really hard to throw with this baseball, and it makes total sense. It's just going to spin a little more on you, which is not what you want with a changeup. So when I think about Pete Crow-Armstrong and I think about how pitchers in the major leagues are going to attack him, you know, he can catch up to any fastball. He's got a really quick bat speed. He also is, you know, a left-handed hitter, so he's going to face a lot of righty pitchers. He's going to get a lot of changeups in the major leagues. And I don't think the AA baseball and the AA league this year is going to give him a good enough look at the kinds of changeups that he's going to see in the major leagues. So if the Cubs do like have, you know, 2024 ambition with him, like if there's a possibility that they're going to let him win a job out of spring training in 2024, like shortly thereafter, I think they have to give him like a lot of time in AAA this year. And really, like, the only reason that it's important to me, because I do think it's okay for guys to jump from AA to the majors, generally speaking. But the specific thing I think they need is like he needs to go see 200 really good changeups. And the nice thing is, like, AAA pitchers generally, their best pitch is changeups. Like, it's a bunch of guys who are, don't have major league fastballs, but have really good changeups. So I want him in Iowa, and I want to see him against like the very best changeups in the International League. And then like when he starts handling those, it's like, all right, like he is the star that we think he is.
That is the analysis that we pay you the big bucks for. That's some good stuff there. How has your kind of vision of what he can be at the major league level, I guess short term and long term, changed? Has it changed? Do you view him the same way as you did before the season?
I think like the upside projection is pretty much the same. Like I think he's checking the same boxes. I think what's changed is like you have more confidence in the projection now. So like that's why you see guys that are, in the 40s and 50s and top 100s when they're in A ball, like they keep doing what they're doing in Double A and then Triple A, like they get to the top 20 in minor league baseball and top 100 lists. Like Pete's doing that. And it's not because the projections changed. It's just because like, okay, check off Double A, like can succeed against those pitchers. Like, he's one step closer to being that guy, to being that sort of 4-win player that I think he's going to be in the bigs.
Yeah, the defense is always there, the speed is always there. So the floor by default is always there for him as a major league player. I've seen this year I feel way more confident in his ability to exceed that floor.
Yeah.
For him to be a more well-rounded hitter and not just I think that him atop a major league lineup on a daily basis I feel more confident in saying that now than I even did this offseason. I think that there's still, I mean, even with him killing it this year, I still think there's a little bit of that tweener risk where like, not tweener in like the way that like we talk about like, oh, is he a center fielder or a left fielder? Like not like that. I mean, in the fact that like if that strikeout rate like goes up just a little bit, if the walk rate goes down just a little bit, and the power isn't quite there just as much as we hope for it to be,
Yeah.
then you're looking at a far less valuable hitter. You know what I mean? I
Right.
don't think it takes a crazy amount in any direction of any of those things for it to really drop off. I think it's just a little bit in each of them. And I don't know, that worries me a little bit, but like I said, far less than it did this offseason.
And that's why we like were calling for the walks early in the season, and we wanted to see them because when you walk more often, you just raise that sort of baseline of offensive value that you're worth. And so like a guy that walks at a sub 5% rate, like it's just really important that balls find holes. And there's going to be seasons where you're just not as valuable as other seasons because it doesn't happen. So if he can get that up to 7, 9%, something like that, then like that's all he needs to like have that baseline where I think he can sort of maintain positive offensive value.
Yeah, the difference between a 28% strikeout rate and a 5% walk rate
Yeah.
versus a 24 and a 9 is an
Huge.
outrageous amount. And
Yep.
it's only 4% in each direction for both of them. That's a huge amount.
I will say, so this last series, they were in Rocket City, and I was watching Jordan Wick start. So I don't know which day that was, probably Thursday, maybe.
Yeah,
And just like very randomly, I'm not calling Pete out for this. I think he made his worst defensive play of the season. There was just a
I missed it.
ball. There was a ball towards left center and a little short, and he just read it wrong off the bat. And then when he went there, he decided not to dive for the ball. He let it drop in front of him and a run scored, or maybe two scored. And in the moment, I thought like, oh man, like I'm surprised he didn't make that. But like, Pete is so good defensively that they showed the replay of it. And the Rocket City announcer, who is generally like a hysterical homer towards Rocket City, like I think the guy's like really fun to listen to because he's
Yeah.
just like openly rooting for his team. Like he was like, I cannot believe he didn't make that play. Like he's like the best defensive player in the league. And so it almost like it was just like one of those like minor mistakes that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, isn't going to like change the way you think of him defensively. But the fact that like not only me, but like someone else, like an announcer for another team noticed it and was like, wow, like I can't believe this incredible player didn't do it. Just like in a way, it almost speaks to how good he is in the field.
I love that. Yeah, I love the Rocket City announcer too.
Yeah.
He is the best for other reasons than some of our guys in the system. But all right, man, we kind of went through it this episode. We had on the docket here that I kind of mentioned earlier. We could have run through some of these players that are potentially ready for call ups. Instead of going into detail about these guys, quick, give me two guys that you think are ready right now to be called up to the next level. Because I know that we're getting into the part of the season, right? We're in June. Like some of these guys are like long overdue for a promotion up a level. So like, who are your two guys that you think? We're recording this on Monday.
Yeah.
The episode's dropping Tuesday morning. People are listening to it. We may already see those transactions taking place. Who is getting the call up a level today?
Okay. Oh, I'm gonna change the question because I'm not gonna predict the Cubs' actions here because there's reasons for these two players not getting bumps, but I
Okay.
think they would be my choices too. One is Riley Martin, who's been really good in Tennessee. Hunter Biggie got called up this week, and Riley has been like just as good as Hunter all season. I think there's a little bit of a left-handed logjam happening at AAA, which is a problem because there's no left-handed logjam happening in Chicago. Like they need to find a left-handed reliever, especially for the 2024 bullpen. Like they really need it. And Riley is succeeding a lot in AA, but throws two breaking balls as his primary pitches that he spins a lot. So we just talked about that baseball. I want the data on AAA pitches with him. I think it's very important for thinking about 2024. My other one is a hitter. It's Felix Stevens, who hit his 11th home run, which ties the system lead this weekend for Myrtle Beach. First baseman, bunch of power, but repeating the level. And, I wrote this offseason, I mentioned him as a breakout candidate. And the whole write up, I was talking about how I thought he was a dark horse candidate to lead the system in home runs because he was leaving Myrtle Beach to go to South Bend. He is still a dark horse candidate to lead the system in home runs despite playing in Myrtle Beach so far. But I think it's very important now. Like you got to start answering the question like prospect or non-prospect, and you can only do that by seeing the next level how he does.
Yeah, Felix Stevens is hitting the crap out of the ball when he makes contact. Like he's just hitting the ball very, very hard. I'll give you a pitcher and a hitter as well. I'm gonna go with two guys in Myrtle Beach. Kind of the same situation where I'm not necessarily saying like they will happen, but they need to happen for this guy's development. The pitcher is Brody McCullough because for the love of God, why is this guy not in South Bend yet? Right, like Brody McCullough has been in every category that Cade Horton is not leading the system in. Brody McCullough is leading all the other categories, or he's second in every category. He has been like he's very clearly way too good for Myrtle Beach. I think we've talked about him quite a bit on the show. Call him to South Bend tomorrow. The other guy is Moises Ballesteros, who is too good for Myrtle Beach. He's a 19-year-old guy. He's walking way more than he's striking out. The power he actually showed off the power a little bit more this past week, putting up some more extra bases. That is very clearly like the next step in his development is to actually like show off the power, like home run, pulling the ball over the fence power, and not just the fact that he's a professional hitter like we know he is. Let's get him up to South Bend. Let's see him fail a little bit, and then continue to be a professional hitter. So those are the two guys I have. There's plenty of guys though.
Another teaser that I'll keep very vague, but I think the listeners out there familiar with me are going to know who I'm talking about. I think we are progressing a little closer towards the activation of somebody who I like to do podcasts with. And I'm very, very excited to see that particular player play baseball again. So shouts to him if he's listening, and can't wait to watch you on tape, my buddy.
Heck yeah, that is exciting. I also will not use his name, but yeah, you're right. I think everybody listening probably has a pretty good idea of who you're talking about. So that was smooth. That was a good one. All right, man. Anything you want to plug before we wrap up here?
No, I'm going to say congratulations to my son, Cameron, just completing his first Little League season in which he's a pitcher, has taken to pitching so much, and had his first save in his last game, which was pretty fun to watch. So, we are now developing pitchers in my household. So let's go.
Who says the pitch lab doesn't work? All right, man. Everybody out there, you can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. You can find Bryan, which I am just now noticing that our names are not up. I took those off of the screen on YouTube. You can find Bryan at Cub Prospects. You can find the show. You can watch us on YouTube at Northside Bound. You can find the podcast on Instagram at Cubs on Deck. You can listen to us anywhere where you listen to podcasts, all that good stuff. You know where to find us. Leave a comment, leave a review. We always appreciate it. We'll try to respond, all that good stuff. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will be back in 1 week, and we will be back with a kind of special episode. Brendan Miller of the CHGO show will be on. He is typically a Major League Cubs guy, so we got some fun things in store for that episode. It should be a fun one. Be sure to tune in. He's a big old nerd. As we're ending the show talking about the pitch lab, it's kind of appropriate to get him on, right? All right. So thank you guys so much, and we'll be back in one short week.